Hey everybody, welcome back to the Fish Tank. I'm Fish, and today I thought it would be fun to have a look at a freeze deck in Minion Masters. Now, freeze stroke frozen, it's kind of a new mechanic to Minion Masters compared to some of the other ones. We don't have a huge amount of options, so I filled out a deck as best I could, and let's have a look about the freeze mechanic, and let's have a look at the cards that I decided to play, and then we'll play the game and see how we get on. So as you can see, we've gone for a Milloween deck. We had a bunch of spells, so seemed like Milloween was the good choice. So if we just remind ourselves what Frozen does. So when a minion is frozen, it cannot move or attack, and this is indicated when it's encased in a giant block of ice. And during that period of time, it takes 50% less damage and 50% less healing from outside sources. So internal healing, like the Glensborough itself, kind of gets around that, but basically frozen minions take less damage, which if you're trying to fight a frozen minion, freeze is a good thing because they can't attack you back, but it's also kind of a bad thing since it prevents you from doing your full amount of damage to them, unless of course you have true damage. We'll have a look at that at the moment. Now, I think here on the tooltip, Frozen says 3 seconds. I seem to recall that it's actually 4 seconds. I think it went up to 4 seconds, so it lasts for 4 seconds. So let's have a look at what we have in this deck. So you can see it's a Rimargaal deck. So we're going to build around Rimargaal, and we're just trying to use all frozen slow stuff as much as possible. So let's just quickly go through the cards. So as we just saw there, we've got Glen's Brew. So Glen's Brew will freeze a friendly target. It will heal it for 150 over the duration. And if it's a stout heart, it will trigger whatever its Revelry mechanic is. And we'll see as we look at some of the other cards what that is. So basically, this is a way to stop a unit of yours dying and hopefully giving it a bit of a heal. So the freeze is going to reduce the incoming damage and it's going to heal for the duration. Sometimes you see people use this in Mordor decks. So if they're about to have something die before the tombstone is ready, they'll Glensborough it just to give it that little bit of a lasting effect. But that's not something that we're playing with at the moment. Next up, we have the Snap Freeze. So just a cheap a spell, not a smell. I don't know how the Snap Freeze smells, but I know that it does spell. Okay, so what does this do? It creates a frost field on the ground and inflicts slow. So slow makes enemy minions slower, both movement-wise and attack-wise. And minions that stay within the frost field for 2 seconds actually become frozen, and then they can't move at all, and then they have the incoming damage reduction. So it lasts for 3 seconds. Minions have to stay in it for 2 seconds. Next up, we have the Frostfeathers. So the Frostfeathers, these guys will inflict slow on the attack. They're also a stout heart minion, so they can help us with our Revelry. And we'll talk about Revelry a bit later when we get to a unit that has it. But Revelry is basically when you spawn 2 stout heart minions close to each other, and you'll see and when you play the game, you'll see there's an indication of a circle around them, as in that's what is close to each other. That will actually trigger a Revelry effect, and different minions will have different Revelry effects. Right, next up we have Bearvalanche. This is a strong spell, not as strong as it was originally, but of course it does inflict slow. So anything that is in it gets slowed, and that's a permanent slow. And it does get very, very slowed whilst the units are in it. So it's a very strong slow whilst the spell is going on, and then a permanent regular slow afterwards. Next up we have the Frostbearer. So kind of like a Curse Bearer, but instead of cursing, he freezes. So he has a frozen aura around him, and he will freeze things that are within it for more than 2 seconds. So like the Snap Freeze spell, but he kind of carries it with him. He is frozen when he spawns. So if you're looking to take a bridge with him, he will take a little while to spawn and grab a bridge. Next up, we have the Mountain Gale. This is kind of I wasn't really sure what else to put in because we didn't have enough sort of frozen spells. So just threw in the Mountain Gale since this is kind of a stout heart deck. So the Mountain Gale, it will heal our friendly stuff, it will slow enemy stuff, and it will also trigger Revelry. Again, we see the Revelry. And we'll see units that have it in a minute. But here, if we just have a look at the Revelry tooltip, if summoned close to another Stoutheart minion, or if another Stoutheart minion is summoned nearby, triggers Revelry. And as mentioned, the Revelry can be different for different units. Next up, we have Rimargaal's Breath. So this is just like Nirvir's Breath, which is horizontal. Rimargaal's Breath is vertical, but it also does rimfire damage, which will apply frozen again if minions are within that for 2 seconds. Okay, here we have Chief Icebreaker Bolf. So he has an ability where his first attack on a minion will freeze it. Now, as we mentioned, when a minion is frozen, it takes 50% less damage. Well, not if the unit that's attacking it has true damage. Remember, true damage ignores any protection, such as shield, divine shield, and frozen. So Bolf can both freeze his target with his first attack and do his maximum DPS to it. So Bolf is a card that was pretty underwhelming when it was released, but in a fairly decent spot right now. Then we have Fergus Flagon Fighter. And this guy does have a Revelry attack. So remember, he does his spinning attack. And the Revelry, if we trigger that with a Stoutheart minion near him, or him near that, or with the Howling Gale, Mountain Gale, that's it, always get that one wrong, it will refresh his attack. So instead of doing his attack and then getting dizzy and sitting there for 5 seconds, you can skip that 5 seconds if you trigger his Revelry at that point. So you can just keep him spinning for another spin attack. And then finally we have Rimargaal, the big blue dragon. So Rimargaal, of course, is the frost dragon, and it has a couple of things that we need to understand how to use it. So firstly, before you can use it, you have to defrost it. And you can see here it has the defrost keyword, and it's got a defrost of 25. So what this means is that when it enters your hand, it will freeze the 2 adjacent slots. Now, or the 2 closest cards, sorry, because it could be closest to one side. Okay, so it freezes the 2 closest cards. And what that means is if that's a minion card, when you play it, it will be frozen when you play it. So if you have a warrior that is next to this, when you play the warrior will be frozen. But what also happens is, you can see here the defrost is at 25. So that basically means you've got to spend 25 mana on frozen minions. So a warrior is a 3 mana minion. If we spawn that in one of the frozen spots, then it will reduce our defrost by 3, which is the mana cost of the warrior. So we're down to 22, and so on and so forth. So we just have to spend 25 mana on minions. So remember, that's minions, not puffs, not spells, not buildings, only minions. So that's one thing you've got to pay attention to if you're trying to get him defrosted as quickly as possible. You've got to have a look at what's in your hand, what's defrostable, and which is the most appropriate thing that you can play at that time. So we'll have a look in the gameplay, and hopefully the defrost will make a little bit more sense. We've also got the impactful entry, so deals 100 damage and does a knockback when it lands, and it's mythic. And finally, it does do a Rimfire attack, Rimfire I think, which again is a freezing attack, but Rimargaal does have true damage, so whilst it will freeze whatever it gets caught up in its attack, that will not reduce its DPS on it. And just going back to the master, I decided to play Milloween because we've got a bunch of spells. Okay, so hopefully that gives you an idea of the purpose of this deck, and also an idea of the cards that are in it and the mechanics that we need to understand. Right, let's have a look how it plays out. Right, let's load in to a 2v2 random game we had. I do a lot of these matches, these decks in randoms, because you can just kind of get away with a bit more nonsense in randoms. It's not quite so sweaty. Right, so basically what we need to do is we need to get Rimargaal in our hand and then work towards defrosting it. So our Frostbearer there in the corner spawns frozen. That's just regular Frostbearer things. You know, with decks like this where you need to get something activated as quickly as possible, the difference between it being one of the first cards in your hand compared to one of the last is really frustrating. But okay, there we see a Frozen Defenso. Not the best answer to it with a melee unit, but there we can see Bolf just full DPS through the Defenso, but gets fairly destroyed. Our teammate is Morelia, and we're against Stormbringer and Apep, just for completeness. My deck is the bottom right, by the way. Okay, so there we have Fergus. Remember, Fergus does have the Revelry mechanic, so we can potentially trigger that. Right, teammate drops the Renderer, but doesn't play particularly well, so it doesn't get the kill on the Stixie. It's the spell killed it, and then it goes to face, looks like, and basically does nothing. Did get a nice spirit on Fergus there, though, so that's going to take them a little while to deal with. And there we see the Revelry triggered by the Mountain Gale. He goes straight back into his spinning attack, gets a little bit more face damage off. Okay, so we're 90 seconds into the game. We still haven't got Rimargaal into our hand yet, but Rimargaal's coming. There we see Rimargaal into our hand. We see the 25 stacks on it. That's the Defrost stacks. Now the two deck slots next to it, the hand slots, the first slot and the third slot, will be frozen. Doesn't make any difference if there are spells. So, you know, potentially we might have too many spells in this deck, but it's just meant to be a bit of fun. Right. So we just pause it for a second there just to see what happened. So we did spawn Bolf at the top. Bolf is a 6-mana minion. Bolf was in our third hand slot, which is one of the closest to Rimargaal. So the 6 mana that we spent on Bolf meant that we reduced our defrost down from 25 to 19. And Bolf did spawn frozen. So you can see again we've got the indicator here on top of Fergus that he is affected by the freeze and will give the defrost towards Rimargaal. So we kind of want to just use that whilst we can. There we see Fergus spawns frozen. And our defrost is down to 12. Remember, spells don't reduce the defrost, so spells in those deck slots a little bit annoying at the moment. But don't worry, we only have a ton of them. We could definitely improve this deck, but I just wanted to try to make it as freezy as possible. Okay, so we've got 10 left on our defrost counter. But again, spells. We can use the Golem to reduce the cost of it, if we get that in the appropriate slot. This is kind of awkward, not really sure what to do here. Just kind of stuck on this 10 defrost. And this is what happens if you're trying to defrost the dragon and you've kind of got too many spells. But it's okay, we're coming back through our deck, so we're going to have Bolf available, there we see. One thing we need to pay attention to is we had Bolf in our 5th card there, and we want to control which deck, which hand slot it goes into. So you need to be careful. If we'd used our whatever was in our 4th slot, then Bolf would have gone in there and wasn't going to be usable for the defrost. So just things you need to pay attention to. So the defrost has been completed. You can see Rimargaal no longer has the icon on it. That means all our minions will now spawn normally. And of course, Rimargaal themselves will be available. So we're a little bit behind on XP at the moment, but it looks like we're going to have a double dragon push. Rimargaal's available for myself, for my teammate. Morelia is at perk 3, so does have the dragon available. And there we see Rimargaal is here. One thing to remember with Rimargaal is Rimargaal cannot hit air. So that's a big restriction that Rimargaal has and requires it to be appropriately supported. So we are behind on XP, but we should be able to get a good push going here. Trying to grab the bridge behind us. See, remember that the good way to deal with the dragon, what he did there, which was really nice, he used the Elite Swarmer to spin it around and tank it and then put his DPS behind it. Very nicely done. But now we're using our Mountain Gale, which is healing everything, slowing them down. Spirit drops on our dragon, pretty lucky there, although almost everything does have a spirit from the looks of it. So a huge push coming here. We've got 2 dragons, both of them have had a spirit land on them. We've got a big arcane golem. Very few chances for these guys to do anything. And there we go. The GG is dropped. And the game is victorious. And there we have it. Hopefully that gave you an overview of how the freeze mechanic works, how the Revelry mechanic works, how Rimargaal works. So it was kind of designed to just be a fun sort of Frost deck, but it also allowed us to, as I say, highlight all of those different mechanics and hopefully give you an idea of how they work. Let me know what you think in the comments, of course. I'll put a link to the deck in there so you can check it out if that's something you're interested in. And yeah, let me know if you had some good wins with it, or if you struggle with it, or if you've got any questions. As always, if you're enjoying the content here in the Fish Tank, don't forget to like, comment, and subscribe if you feel it deserves it. I'm Bad as a Fish, and we are Awkward Waving. Hopefully you are too.